The first thing Tyron Graith noticed that morning was that somebody had blocked a fire exit with decorative crates. The second was that 3 Valor executives had already walked past without seeing the problem. He stopped his maintenance cart, shoved the crates aside, and scanned the door panel. A red warning blinked across his handheld. Someone from events had changed the evacuation settings for the Valor Crown Community Festival without telling facilities. Tyron sighed and pulled a screwdriver from his belt. 6 years in the building had taught him that expensive people could ignore cheap problems until those problems became emergencies. He was 29, an alpha, broad enough that strangers sometimes mistook him for security, but his gray work shirt and worn tool belt corrected them quickly. He was not important inside Valor Crown. He fixed doors, pipes, ventilation, access panels, and whatever else people remembered only after it stopped working. That suited him. Above the service level, the atrium was filling with food stalls, children's games, free clinics, job booths, and tables from the Valor Haven network. The Valors were famous for more than luxury property and hotels. Their organization quietly moved vulnerable Omegas and other people out of dangerous homes, arranged legal help, settled predatory debts, and provided private protection when ordinary systems failed. Everyone also knew that the Valor name carried a darker kind of authority. Nobody at the festival said Mafia. Nobody needed to. Shortly after lunch, Tyron's handheld flashed with a localized fire alarm from the west mezzanine. It vanished almost immediately, canceled from a security terminal. That made him stop. Real alarms did not disappear that cleanly. He left his sandwich unfinished and took the service stairs up. There was no smoke, no heat, and no crowd anymore. Only a little girl standing beside a locked staff door with both hands around the straps of a small backpack. Her auburn hair was tied into 2 uneven braids, and she looked furious at herself for being scared. Tyron slowed before approaching. "You lose somebody?" She studied his uniform. "My guard." Tyron crouched slightly. "What's your name?" "Mira." "I'm Tyron. Do you know your guard's name?" She nodded. "Davin. He told me to stay near the blue banner, but people moved when the alarm happened." Tyron reached for his radio. Before he could speak, a man in a black Valor security jacket rounded the corner. Relief spread over his face too quickly. "There you are." "I'll take her." Myria started toward him. Tyron stepped sideways. His eyes had caught the badge at the man's chest. The photograph matched, but the colored access stripe belonged to the previous quarter. Facilities workers noticed stupid details because stupid details were how buildings failed. "Where's Davin?" Tyron asked. The man's smile flattened. "Handling the alarm." "Then call him." "Move." Tyron looked at Myria. "Stay behind me." The man's hand slipped inside his jacket. Tyron did not wait to see what came out. He hit the emergency release beside the staff door, pushed Myria through, and slammed it behind them. The corridor beyond was narrow and unfinished, all concrete, pipes, and locked service rooms. "Can you run?" he asked. Myria nodded. "Good. Stay close." They moved fast. Tyron tried his radio. Static. His phone showed no internal signal. Someone had killed coverage in that section. Footsteps hit the corridor behind them. Tyron turned through a storage bay, scanned his badge, and dropped a steel shutter between them and the first pursuer. A second man appeared from another entrance. Tyron grabbed a fire extinguisher, blasted white powder into his face, and pulled Myria toward a maintenance stair. More footsteps came from below. This was not a random kidnapping. Whoever had planned it knew the service routes. Tyron saw a narrow access hatch near the ceiling, one he could probably squeeze through alone. He looked at Myria. She would never reach it. He kept moving instead. They made it to an unfinished restaurant unit before the route closed around them. 4 men entered from different sides. One held a knife. Another pointed at Myria's backpack. "The charm." "Take the charm and go." Tyron glanced down. A small silver rabbit hung from one zipper. Until that moment he had assumed the girl was the target. Now he understood that at least part of the attack was about the thing she carried. "Give it to them," he said quietly. Maria clutched the backpack tighter. "It was my mother's." The nearest man lunged. Tyron shoved a construction table into his path, caught the attacker's wrist, and drove him into the wall. He had no fantasy that he could win a fair fight against 4 armed men. So he did not fight fair. He kicked a breaker switch and killed half the lights, opened a sprinkler valve, and triggered the local emergency alarm. Red strobes began flashing. One attacker cursed and swung. The blade cut Tyron's shoulder. Another caught him across the ribs. He kept himself between them and Maria. "Stay behind the counter," he told her. "Don't move until real security comes." "Tyron, do it." She obeyed. The next minute became noise, wet floor, metal, and pain. Tyron used a fallen chair, an extinguisher canister, and one knife he managed to knock from an attacker's hand. He was cut again across the back when he turned to stop a man reaching around him for Maria. His knee hit the floor. He forced himself up. Somewhere beyond the shutter, somebody was pounding against it. Valor Security had finally found them. One attacker made a last rush for the backpack. Tyron caught him, took another blade along his side, and held on long enough for the shutter to rise. Armed guards flooded the room. The attackers scattered or dropped their weapons. Tyron saw black uniforms moving past him, then Maria's small hands gripping his sleeve. "You're bleeding." He tried to tell her that was an excellent observation. Nothing came out. The floor tilted. The last thing he saw was the silver rabbit pressed against her chest. Tyron woke to silence and the smell of a private hospital room. For several seconds he could not understand why the ceiling looked too high or why his body felt as if somebody had rebuilt it badly. He tried to sit up. Pain stopped him. A monitor beeped. A nurse appeared, told him he had been unconscious for 3 days, then asked him not to move. Tyron barely heard the rest. His throat was dry. "The girl." The nurse paused. "Mira. Is she okay?" Before the nurse answered, Tyron noticed the glass wall beyond the room. Armed Alpha and Beta guards stood outside. Beyond them, in a private lounge, were more men than any hospital visit required. Most were Omegas. Some were young, some older, all dressed in dark suits that cost more than Tyron made in months. The strange part was not their number. It was the way the guards waited for their instructions. One Omega sat closest to Tyron's bed, composed and unreadable, with a face Tyron vaguely recognized from business news he never watched closely enough. 2 others stood nearby. Nobody introduced themselves. The room had the quiet pressure of a meeting Tyron had accidentally survived his way into. Then the door opened and Maria ran inside. "Tyron." A woman behind her tried to slow her, but the girl was already beside the bed. Tyron let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "You're okay. You got hurt." "I'm noticing that." Her mouth trembled. Tyron smiled. "Hey. We made it." She nodded hard, then turned toward the Omega near the bed. "Uncle Erend. Tell him I'm fine." Tyron's eyes moved from the girl to the man. "Erend Valor." The name landed all at once. Valor Crown. Valor Group. The Haven Network. The Syndicate people never named too loudly. Tyron looked back at Maria. "Your last name is Valor?" Maria blinked. "Yes." Somewhere behind Erend, one of the Omegas gave a quiet laugh. Erend did not. He studied Tyron for several seconds. "You didn't know who she was." It was not a question. "No. You had no idea who you were protecting." "She was 8. Tyron shifted, immediately regretted it, and settled back. What was I supposed to do? Ask for a family tree before helping her? A few expressions changed around the room. Aaron's did not, but something in his gaze sharpened. He looked toward Maria. "Give us a minute." She protested until Tyron promised he was not going anywhere. When the door closed behind her, the warmth left the room. One of the Omegas placed a tablet on the bed tray. Tyron saw access logs, security timestamps, and his own employee number highlighted in red. Aaron folded his hands. The men who entered the restricted service level used cloned credentials. Tyron read the number again. Mine. Yes. I didn't give them to anyone. We know you saved Myria. Aaron's tone stayed controlled. We also know somebody used your access to reach her. Tyron looked through the glass at the line of armed guards and the room full of powerful Omegas beyond them. 3 days earlier, none of these people would have known his name. Now every person in the Vaylor family seemed to know exactly who he was. So am I a guest or a suspect? He asked. Aaron's mouth moved by the smallest degree, not quite a smile. At the moment, Tyron Graith, you're both. Aaron did not have Tyron arrested. That surprised Tyron almost as much as waking up in a private medical wing. Instead, Vaylor security moved him to a recovery suite on the same floor, posted guards outside, and informed him that the men from the festival had not all been identified. Protection, Aaron called it. Tyron called it house arrest with better sheets. On the second morning, Aaron arrived with coffee and a folder of access reports. You are still a suspect, he said. You are allowed to be suspicious back. Tyron took the cup. Good. I was worried this relationship was becoming unbalanced. For the first time, Aaron almost smiled. Tyron noticed and decided not to mention it. The investigation had one advantage. Nobody knew Vaylor Crown service systems better than the people who repaired them. Tyron could tell which doors had been opened normally, which panels had been tampered with, and which logs looked too clean to be real. Aaron understood the organization. Tyron understood the building. Neither man liked depending on the other, which made the arrangement work better than either expected. A week later, Tyron was cleared to walk the lower service floors with medical restrictions he mostly ignored. Aaron came with him. The first time the Omega boss reached for the wrong latch on a security cabinet, Tyron caught his wrist. Not that one. Aaron looked down at Tyron's hand, then at him. Why? Because that's the emergency release. If you pull it, every door in this section logs a fault and my team spends an hour resetting them. Aaron stepped back. You could have simply told me. I just did. After physically stopping me. You own the building. That doesn't mean the building trusts you. Aaron stared at him. Tyron opened the cabinet. There. See? Humility. That earned him a real short laugh. It disappeared quickly, but Tyron carried the sound with him longer than he wanted to admit. They found a replaced tamper seal behind one panel and signs that somebody with internal knowledge had copied a maintenance credential before the festival. The attack had required more than hired muscle. Someone inside Vaylor had helped. That fact made Aaron colder, not louder. Tyron began seeing the difference between a dangerous man and a man performing danger. Aaron rarely raised his voice. He asked a question, waited through the silence, and let other people become nervous enough to answer it. Tyron also saw the other side of Vaylor. One afternoon they crossed a conference room where a young Omega and his little brother were meeting Haven staff. The older boy kept glancing toward the door. Aaron stopped, spoke quietly to a security officer, and within minutes the family had a different apartment, a new transport route, and an escort assigned. I thought Haven was public relations, Tyron said when they left. Aaron gave him a flat look. Do you always insult people immediately after they help you? Only if I was wrong about them. Aaron's expression softened a fraction. My sister started it with 3 apartments above an old restaurant. I made it large enough that hurting someone under Vaylor protection became expensive. That's still a threat. I never said it wasn't. Myria became the easiest part of Tyron's recovery. She visited with homework, snacks she was not supposed to bring into the medical wing, and endless questions about the parts of the building she had never been allowed to see. One evening Tyron found Aaron sitting on the floor beside her sofa, sleeves rolled up, repairing the torn ear of a stuffed rabbit. Myria had fallen asleep against a cushion. Tyron leaned in the doorway. I should take a picture. Aaron did not look up. You should value your continued employment. I'm not sure I still have employment. Then value your continued breathing. Tyron grinned. There he is. Mafia boss again. Aaron finished the stitch, placed the rabbit beside Maria, and stood. For a second, neither man moved. The room was quiet, warm, ordinary. Tyron realized he had stopped seeing Aaron only as the man people obeyed. Aaron, judging by the way his gaze lingered, had started making the same mistake about Tyron. The shift became clearer during a late-night review of security footage. Aaron had been working for hours when his suppressant patch began failing. Tyron smelled the change before Aaron said anything. The omega scent in the room deepened, warm and distracting enough to pull an instinctive response from Tyron's body. Aaron noticed immediately. His shoulders tightened. Tyron did not move toward him. He crossed to the ventilation control, increased airflow, took the emergency suppressant kit from the cabinet, and placed it within Aaron's reach. Then he walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Aaron asked. "Outside." "You aren't affected?" Tyron looked back. "I am." Aaron's eyes narrowed. "Then why leave?" Tyron rested one hand on the doorframe. "Being affected doesn't give me permission to do anything about it." He stepped out and waited in the hall until Aaron called him back. When he returned, the scent was controlled again. Aaron said nothing for several minutes. Then he pushed a fresh cup of coffee toward Tyron without looking at him. It was a small gesture. Tyron understood it anyway. The next major lead nearly destroyed that new trust. Security records showed that Kevin Vaylor had accessed a restricted server route shortly before the festival attack. More logs placed his credentials near the west mezzanine. Tyron laid the reports on Aaron's desk. "You need to consider him." Aaron's face went still. "He's my brother. That doesn't make the log disappear. You think Kevin helped men attack Maria? I think someone wants us to believe he did. But until we prove otherwise, yes, he has to be checked." Aaron stood. "You do not know my family." Tyron stood too. "Then don't ask me to investigate your family if I'm only allowed to suspect strangers." The room went silent. Aaron told him to leave. Tyron did, angry enough to ignore the pain in his side all the way back to the medical wing. Hours later, the timestamp in the Kevin report kept bothering him. Tyron opened an old maintenance ticket on his tablet. The server room door Kevin supposedly used at 1417 had been physically dismantled between 1405 and 1431. Tyron remembered because he had been the one lying on the floor with the motor assembly in his hands. Nobody had entered through that door. The log was fabricated. Tyron went straight back to Aaron. Kevin was there, furious and exhausted. Tyron put the maintenance record on the desk. "Your brother didn't do it." Aaron read it twice. "You're certain?" "Unless Kevin learned to walk through steel." Kevin looked at Tyron. "I don't." "Good. One less problem." Aaron's gaze stayed on Tyron. He had expected Tyron to defend his own accusation. Instead, Tyron had worked to destroy it. Something between them settled into place. Later, when Kevin left, Aaron remained by the window instead of returning to work. "I was unfair to you," he said. Tyron raised an eyebrow. "Should I record this?" "Do that and I will deny it." Tyron smiled, then grew serious. "You were protecting your brother. I was protecting what I wanted to believe." Aaron looked at him. "There is a difference." Tyron had expected command, suspicion, maybe gratitude. He had not expected an apology. "For what it is worth, I would have been angry too." "You were angry?" "Yes, but I am extremely reasonable when discussing my own behavior." Aaron gave him another brief laugh. The tension left the room without either man naming what had changed. The final clue came from Maria herself. She was sitting cross-legged on Tyron's sofa, turning the silver rabbit charm between her fingers while complaining about mathematics. Tyron watched the charm swing and suddenly remembered one attacker shouting for it. "Maria, can I see that?" She handed it over reluctantly. It was Mom's. The silver casing was heavier than it looked. Kevin examined it under a magnifier and found a seam hidden beneath one ear. Inside was a tiny encrypted data chip. Maria stared at it. "Why would Mom put that there?" Nobody answered immediately. Aaron's face had lost all color. His older sister had died years earlier, and the charm had been one of the few things Maria kept from her. Tyron looked at the chip, then at Aaron. The attack had finally made sense in a different way. They weren't trying to take Maria, he said. Not at first. Aaron closed his hand around the tiny device. They were trying to take what her mother left behind. Caven needed 2 days to break the first layer of encryption. When the files finally opened, nobody celebrated. The chip held years of records. Shell companies, false invoices, money routed away from businesses Aaron had ordered cleaned up, and addresses from Haven properties accessed without authorization. Some protected people had been exposed to debt collectors and criminal brokers who should never have known where they were. The pattern pointed toward a loose network called the Roan Circle, an old alliance of financiers, operators, and crime families that had lost money as Aaron expanded Haven and shut down predatory businesses. They were not fighting him because he was an Omega. They were fighting him because his version of Valor made their old methods less profitable. One name kept appearing around the edges of the records without ever sitting directly in the center. Havoc Roan. He had advised Aaron's father, handled family legal matters for decades, helped raise the brothers after their father died, and stood beside them when Maria's mother passed away. Aaron read the connections in silence. Tyron did not tell him what they meant. You don't have to decide what Havoc is before the evidence does, he said. Aaron looked at him for a long moment. You learned something from our argument. Mostly that you become unpleasant when I insult your family. A remarkable discovery. The deeper they looked, the clearer the plan became. Maria's mother had uncovered the siphoning years earlier and copied proof before she died. She had hidden it in the rabbit charm because it was personal, harmless looking, and always close to her daughter. Havoc knew evidence existed but not where it had gone. Someone connected to the Roan Circle spotted Maria carrying the charm at the festival and recognized it. The false alarm and security breach had been arranged quickly to retrieve it. Tyron's credentials were perfect cover because maintenance access reached the service corridors without drawing attention. If the operation failed, the blame could fall on an employee nobody important knew. It would have worked if Tyron had handed Maria to the first man wearing a security jacket. The discovery changed the way Aaron treated him, but not in the simple way Tyron expected. The Omega boss became more protective and more irritated whenever Tyron ignored medical advice. Tyron became more aware of Aaron's presence even when nothing biological was happening. He noticed the way Aaron loosened his cuffs only after Maria was asleep, the way he checked every Haven incident himself when a child was involved, and the way he stood slightly apart from a room full of people even when every person there answered to him. One evening Tyron reopened the cut along his ribs while reaching behind a security panel. Aaron found out before Tyron reached his room. Sit. I have a nurse. The nurse has apparently failed to stop you from being stupid. Tyron sat on the edge of the sofa while Aaron cleaned the cut with careful, angry movements. You know this is not helping your reputation as a terrifying Mafia boss. My reputation will survive. Good. I was worried. Aaron's fingers paused against Tyron's side. The joke disappeared between them. Neither man moved away quickly enough. Later that night, Tyron stood at Aaron's office window while the city lights reflected across the glass. Everyone knows my name now, he said. Security executives, people I've never met. Some of them call me the man who saved a Valor. Aaron waited. I keep wondering what happens if she wasn't a Valor. If she was just some kid who got lost near a service door. Would anyone care that I got stabbed for her? Aaron came to stand beside him. I would. Tyron turned. You wouldn't have known me. I would have learned your name. Aaron's voice was quiet. Because you still would have stayed. Tyron had spent weeks refusing to let gratitude become something more flattering than it deserved. That answer reached a place praise had not. He looked away first. Aaron did not push. The pressure between them grew anyway. They started finding reasons to remain in the same room after meetings ended. Maria noticed before either man admitted it and began arranging seats so Tyron always ended up beside Aaron. Nearest noticed too and looked far too entertained by the situation. Caven noticed and looked as if he regretted ever proving Tyron innocent. Tyron enjoyed all three reactions more than he should have. What he did not enjoy was Erend trying to remove him from the investigation after a man linked to Roan's circle was seen near Tyron's apartment. "No," Tyron said when Erend ordered security to move him away from Valor Crown. "That wasn't a request." "Then make a better order." Erend's jaw tightened. "You nearly died once because of this family. I nearly died because 4 men had knives and a child was behind me. Stop rewriting it like you caused it." "I watched you almost die once," Erend snapped. "I'm not doing it twice." Tyron went still. Erend seemed to realize what he had admitted, but it was too late. Tyron stepped closer. "Am I still here because I'm useful?" "You are useful." "That wasn't the question." Erend's scent changed slightly, controlled but unmistakable. Tyron stayed where he was. "Do you want me here?" Erend looked furious with the question and even more furious with himself. "Yes." Tyron's mouth curved. "That sounded painful." "It was." "Good." Erend grabbed the front of his shirt and kissed him. The kiss was not polite or experimental. Weeks of restraint broke at once. Tyron answered, one hand finding Erend's waist, the other stopping himself from pulling him closer too fast. Erend did it for him. When they finally separated, both were breathing harder. Tyron rested his forehead against Erend's. "We should not make a permanent decision because we're angry and attracted to each other." Erend's eyes stayed on his mouth. "For once, I hate that you're sensible." Tyron smiled. "Give it time." They did give it time, though not much. Over the next several days, evidence around Havoc tightened. Old legal templates connected him to shell companies. A former contractor admitted Havoc's office had introduced him to one of the Circle's brokers. Havoc himself remained calm, helpful, almost paternal when he visited Erend. Nothing in his behavior was wrong, which made Tyron trust it less. When Havoc shook Tyron's hand, he said, "Be careful. Becoming important to this family has consequences." The words were reasonable. The look that accompanied them was not. Tyron mentioned it afterward. Erend did not dismiss him. That mattered more than any declaration. The night their restraint finally failed did not begin as a plan. Erend was treating Tyron's reopened wound again, angry because Tyron had ignored another restriction. Tyron caught his wrist when he tried to pull away. Neither man spoke. Erend's scent deepened, and Tyron felt the answering pull in himself. But this time they had already talked, argued, stepped back, and chosen each other repeatedly while fully clear-headed. Tyron touched Erend's face. Erend leaned into the contact before kissing him again. The kiss lasted longer, then became something neither wanted to stop. They stayed together that night. What began with another kiss turned into a slow, private surrender of the distance they had kept between them for weeks. Tyron checked Erend's response whenever instinct threatened to move faster than choice, and Erend made it equally clear that he wanted him there. Their bond was not an accident of heat or rut. When they finally marked each other, it was mutual, deliberate, and intimate enough that both understood the meaning before morning. They remained close afterward, speaking quietly in the dark until the intensity settled and the new bond felt less like a claim than a promise they had made in both directions. If you want the full uncut 18+ raw version of this intimate scene, including the complete bond and marking, you can watch or read it on Patreon. The link is in the video description. Morning destroyed the calm. Caven entered without knocking, stopped when he caught the new bond scent, and decided not to comment. Instead, he placed a tablet on the table. A bank account in Tyron's name had received payments from a contractor tied to the festival attackers. Edited footage showed someone with Tyron's build entering restricted corridors. Witness statements claimed he had asked about Myria's movements before the event. Every piece was false, but together they told a convincing story. Tyron had staged the rescue to gain access to Erend. Nearest arrived minutes later with worse news. Havoc had circulated the evidence through the senior network and requested an emergency council. Tyron looked at Erend. The bond between them was barely hours old, and somebody had already turned it into a weapon. If you defend me now, they'll say the bond compromised you. Erend picked up his jacket. Then we prove the evidence is false. And if we can't before the council? Erend met his eyes. Then they learn how difficult I am to move once I have chosen where I stand. The emergency council met in a private room above Valor Crown before noon. Nearly 20 senior figures sat around the long table, most of them Omegas, with a handful of Betas and Alphas who controlled security or finance. Tyron entered beside Erend instead of behind him. That drew looks immediately. Havoc Roan stood at the far end, silver-haired, composed, wearing the expression of a man who hated what duty had supposedly forced him to do. His eyes stopped for half a second on the fresh bond mark above Tyron's collar. Erend, he said, I wish this meeting were unnecessary. Erend took his seat. Then make it useful. Havoc presented the case carefully. Tyron's cloned credentials had opened restricted areas. Money had been transferred into an account under his name. Video placed a man with his height and build near security corridors. Contractors claimed Tyron had asked unusual questions before the festival. A knife recovered from the attack carried Tyron's fingerprints because Tyron had taken it from one of the men while protecting Myria. Each fact had an innocent explanation. Together they looked ugly. One senior Omega leaned forward. You bonded him before this evidence became public. Yes, Erend said. Then you cannot judge him impartially. Havoc lowered his voice as if he were trying to protect Erend from embarrassment. No one questions what Myria's rescue did to this family. But gratitude can become attachment. Attachment can become a weakness an intelligent alpha knows how to use. Tyron saw the real attack then. Havoc was not only accusing him of conspiracy. He was using Tyron to argue that Erend had become soft. An Omega boss distracted by an alpha outsider, the same leader who spent Valor money protecting debtors, abused workers, and people the old criminal system considered disposable. Havoc wanted the room to fear Erend's values as much as it feared Tyron. Tyron leaned toward Erend. If giving me up buys you time, do it. Erend turned his head slowly. Do not insult me in my own council room. I'm serious. So am I. Erend rose. The room quieted. I have spent most of my life learning when people lie to me. Tyron Graith never asked for access to my family, money from my organization, or a position beside me. He asked for working doors, accurate logs, and permission to finish his coffee before somebody created another emergency. A few mouths twitched. Erend's gaze moved to Havoc. The one man in this room who never demanded that I trust him is the man I trust most. Havoc's expression finally tightened. You would risk the organization for him? No. I am refusing to hand the organization to whoever built evidence this perfect. Tyron looked again at the footage displayed on the wall. Something small had bothered him since Caven first showed it. He moved closer. The timestamp in the corner used a narrow open number 4. Valor Crown's old camera controller had displayed time that way. Tyron had replaced it months before the festival after a failed audit. The new controller used a closed 4. He pointed at the screen. This recording could not have been generated on the date shown. Caven was already moving. He pulled archived system records onto another screen. The replacement date appeared in black and white. Murmurs spread around the table. Nearest checked the payment trail and found that one supposedly old account had been created after the first attack. Another senior member demanded the raw footage. Havoc's calm face changed by a fraction. Then the lights went out. Emergency lamps snapped on. Alarms sounded through the building. Caven looked at his tablet. Electrical fault on the west distribution line. Archive server is losing power. Tyron was already standing. That's not a fault. Someone forced a shutdown sequence. Erend did not waste time asking who. Caven, keep the network alive. Nearest, move Myria and Haven staff to the east safe zone. Public evacuation stays open. Nobody closes an exit just to catch Havoc. Havoc stepped back from the table. 2 men near him moved at the same time. Security reached for weapons. Havoc did not run toward the public floors. He went for the service door. Tyron followed with Erend and 2 guards. Smoke began spreading from an archive utility room, but the fire suppression system had been disabled in that section. Tyron stopped at a wall panel and tore the cover loose. He wants the archive destroyed and the evacuation to hide his exit. Can you stop it? Erend asked. I can keep the fire from reaching the main data room. Caven has to save the files. Tyron rerouted power, forced 2 fire shutters down, and opened a secondary suppression line manually. Water hammered through the pipes. His radio crackled. Caven's voice came through. Backups are holding. Havoc is moving toward loading level 3. Tyron looked at Erend. He's using the old service tunnel. You know it. I know every ugly part of this building. They cut through a narrow maintenance stair and reached the loading tunnel first. Havoc appeared with 2 allies. One carried a hard case. The other held a weapon. Erend stepped into the center of the corridor. It ends here. Havoc looked past him at Tyron. This is exactly what I warned your father would happen one day. Valor was built because people feared it. You turned it into a shelter. Erend's face stayed cold. And it became richer while doing it. You spend power protecting people who cannot repay it. They repay it every day by knowing which name kept them safe. Havoc gave a bitter laugh. Loyalty does not replace fear. No, Erend said. It outlasts it. One of Havoc's men raised the weapon toward Tyron. Erend moved, but Tyron was closer to the wall controls. He hit an old mechanical switch. A steel barrier dropped between them with a violent crash, separating the armed man from the tunnel. Old system, Tyron said through the metal grid. Still works. Valor security arrived from both ends seconds later. The remaining ally tried to rush Tyron and was taken down before Tyron had to prove anything with his fists. He was done bleeding for dramatic effect. Havoc was arrested alive. Erend could have ordered something final in that tunnel. Instead he looked at the man who had helped raise him and said, You wanted me to prove Valor survives through fear. I'm going to prove you wrong where you can watch it happen. Over the next month, Erend dismantled the Roan Circle's influence piece by piece. Accounts were frozen, contracts seized, compromised captains removed, and evidence that could safely be handed to authorities moved through Valor's lawyers. Other evidence became leverage against people who had assumed Erend would react with uncontrolled violence. Haven did not shrink. Its internal security budget doubled. The message was simple. Trying to use vulnerable people against Valor would now cost even more than before. Havoc had accused Erend of weakening the family. His failure strengthened the very system he hated. Tyron recovered again, though this time nobody allowed him to pretend he did not need rest. Erend offered him the title of Chief Security. Tyron refused before he finished the sentence. I'm not a security commander. You stopped an internal attack twice. I know buildings and the people everyone forgets to ask. That's different. He slid a proposal across Erend's desk. A new infrastructure and safety division that would connect maintenance, emergency planning, Haven facilities, and staff security instead of treating them as separate systems. Erend read the first page. Your requested salary is insulting. Too high. You know it is. You told me I was underpaid. Nearest, sitting nearby, laughed so hard Erend ordered him out. Tyron got most of the salary. 6 months after the festival, the Valor family had changed around him without ever holding a ceremony for it. Caven still claimed he did not fully trust Tyron, but called him first whenever a security log looked wrong. Nearest called him brother-in-law whenever Erend was close enough to be annoyed. Myria discovered that Tyron was easier to persuade than her uncle and exploited the fact shamelessly. Tyron and Erend remained bonded partners without turning into different people. Erend still ran Valor with a cold eye and morally flexible methods when necessary. Tyron still crawled under access panels when he thought his team had missed something. One afternoon Erend found him crouched beside a young maintenance worker who had accidentally shut down a service elevator. The boy looked terrified. Tyron did not shout. He handed him a tool and made him trace the fault until he understood it. People only notice this job when something goes wrong, Tyron told him. So learn from it and make sure the next thing goes right. Aaron waited until the worker left, then adjusted Tyron's crooked collar, his fingers brushing the bond mark beneath it. You could have someone else teach him. I could. But you won't. Probably not. Aaron shook his head, though there was no real irritation in it. Months earlier, Tyron had awakened to a room full of powerful Omegas and wondered why any of them cared whether an ordinary maintenance worker lived. Now, when he entered that same private lounge, people shifted naturally to make room for him beside Aaron. Nobody announced that he belonged there. They did not have to. Tyron had protected a Veiler before knowing the name meant anything. When the time came, the Veilers had stood beside him because they finally knew exactly who he was. Saving Myria had not made Tyron valuable. It had only forced powerful people to notice the value that had been there all along. If you enjoyed this episode and want the longer and censored version, you can find the full story on my Patreon through the link in the video description. The Patreon version includes more chemistry between the characters, extra relationship moments, extended scenes that were shortened or removed for YouTube, and the complete raw 18+ bonding and intimate scenes. Your support there also helps me keep creating more stories like this. Thank you so much for watching, for leaving your thoughts in the comments, and for supporting the channel. I truly appreciate every one of you, and I'll see you again very soon.